right, are you ready for the jury? Your side, yes?
Yes, Judge.
All right, bring them in.
Yes, sir.
All right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. How are you? Good? I understand there were some traffic issues. I don't know if any of you were in them, but I understand there was some bad traffic this morning. So glad you all made it. Everybody able to follow my instructions? Yes?
Yes.
All right, excellent. State, are you ready to proceed?
We are, Your Honor.
All right, call your next witness.
Your Honor, state we call Anna Cox.
All right, Anna Cox. Good morning, Ms. Cox.
Good morning.
Can you step up to the podium? Stop right there. Turn and be sworn by my sir.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do. All right. Please have a seat in the witness stand, speaking aloud and clear voice for me. All right, state, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, ma'am. Could you please turn to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury, introduce yourself by stating your name?
My name is Anna Marie Cox.
Ms. Cox, what do you do for a living?
I am a bloodstain pattern analyst and a specialist in chemical enhancement.
And who do you work for?
I currently am employed by myself. I own my own business.
And what is the name of your business?
It is Cox Forensic Consulting and Training.
All right. Prior to owning your own business, what did you do?
Prior to owning my own business, I was a volunteer autopsy technician at the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office in 2000. I then subsequently became employed by the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office Crime Scene Unit. I was a forensic science specialist there for just about 3 weeks shy of 13 years.
Okay. So what kind of, we had some forensic techs talk in this case, but those are from Pasco County, same or similar duties in Pinellas County, the Sheriff's Office?
Yes.
And to have that job, was there a certain educational background that you had to have to do that job?
Yes.
Can you tell the jury a little bit about your educational background that allowed you to perform those duties?
I have both a formal and a professional education background. My formal education includes an associate's in crime scene technology from St. Petersburg College, which includes the core courses for actual physical crime scene work. Fingerprint processing, crime scene safety, correct chemical procedures, latent print examination, coursework along those lines. I also have a Bachelor's of Science degree where I have coursework in chemistry, physics, and biology to include their laboratory components. I have a certificate, graduate certificate of death investigation from the University of Florida, where I had to complete graduate coursework in forensic DNA analysis, forensic anthropology, and forensic medicine 1 and 2. I also have a master's degree of forensic science from National University with advanced coursework in more crime scene applicable fields such as additional photography, additional advanced latent fingerprints, major case investigations, homicide profiling, and I also had to complete a thesis, of which I did on bloodstain pattern analysis.
Right. In addition to that formal education, through your career as a forensic investigator, have you participated in professional education classes, classes that are specific or coursework specific to forensics?
Yes, I actually have almost 400, a little over 450 hours of professional education. That includes coursework specifically in bloodstain pattern analysis, specifically in chemical enhancement of blood, specifically in homicide processing techniques, as well as crime scene reconstruction. And I also teach coursework along the same lines professionally as well.
And where do you teach?
I teach for local agencies. I will go to the agencies and conduct either week-long or 2-day coursework in bloodstain pattern analysis. I also train local agencies on using difficult chemicals that some agencies aren't really familiar with and requires a little bit more personal mixing and can be a little intimidating, so I train them on that as well. And I also speak professionally for local associations.
What associations do you speak for?
I speak for the Florida Sheriff's Association, the National Homicide Investigator Association, the International Homicide Investigation Association, and the Florida Division of the International Association of Identification.
All right. In addition to speaking engagements and for those groups, are you a member of any professional organization that's specifically related to forensic work?
Yes, I'm a member of the International Association of Identification, as well as the International Association of Bloodstain Pattern Analysts.
All right. And do you keep current on all trends or new investigative techniques as it relates to the coursework or forensic investigation?
Yes, being a member of those associations affords me the opportunity to have access to their journals and their publications, where my peers will do up-and-coming experiments or lectures, and I have the opportunity to read up on those as well. Plus, teaching out in the field at the local agencies. When the new students come in, they really have a lot of new questions, which forces me to make sure that I maintain my education in the field as well. So they keep me on my toes.
And I'd like to go back to basically your forensic consulting and training company that you have. As part of that being self-employed, you're available to come and examine crime scenes.
Yes.
If need be, you're able to examine photographs.
Yes.
Meet with witnesses if necessary.
I very rarely ever meet with witnesses.
Okay.
I try to maintain basically a scientific approach. After that is done, if I need witness information, I'll get that through my client.
All right. And in cases like this, your client would be the state of Florida, is that correct?
Correct.
And you're paid for the analysis for which we're going to talk about, correct?
Yes, I'm paid for my work product, yes.
All right. I would like to start off by talking about blood spatter and blood spatter analysis. In doing that, have you prepared a number of slides, PowerPoint slides that would aid you in describing what it is that you do and what it is that you're looking for?
Yes, I have.
All right. Your Honor, I'd ask that the witness be allowed to step down.
She may.
Ms. Cox, I'm just going to warn you that there are going to be two cords back here. All right, Ms. Cox, if you can step right over here, actually let's switch. You can stand over here close to the court reporter. I'll stand over here. I'm just going to remind you to be nice and loud.
So Ruzo, before you can turn the microphone so that she's being picked up by the microphone. Perfect, thank you.
All right.
And people with headphones on, so here's the mic.
All right. All right, Ms. Cox, I'd like to talk about blood stain pattern analysis, okay? Generally, what is blood stain pattern analysis?
It's the scientific study of the blood stains and patterns that result from a bloodshedding event. And any event where blood is shed, it can be analyzed based on the dynamics of the blood and its distribution. We identify, we document, we analyze, and we define blood stains and patterns based on a multiple of different characteristics. We look at their size, we look at their shape, we look at their overall distribution, we take in consideration the number of the stains that there are. But then we also have to take into consideration the locations of the stain, the surface it's on, the relationship of other stains at the scene, the scene-specific variables, and what I mean by that is if there's medical intervention, if there's any type of scene alteration, if the victim has been transported and is no longer at the scene. So we have to take in consideration stains that might be caused by those types of events. And then we also have to have just a history of the scene and the evidence, and that basically comes into play when I read the crime scene technician reports and their description of where items of evidence were, what their condition when they were collected, whether they were wet, whether they were folded, whether they were in a different location. So the history also allows me to focus on stains that are relevant to the actual bloodshedding event itself.
And is there a purpose to the work that you do?
The purpose is to attempt to do an overall reconstruction. Sometimes we are able to do a very detailed reconstruction, sometimes we are not. But most of the time we can tell you where victims were located when the bloodshedding event occurred. We can also tell you at times where a potential suspect or a witness to the event may have been located. We can sequence some of the patterns in the scene. So basically what that means is I will have one type of pattern and then something will come through and alter that pattern, and I'll be able to tell that. Also movement of a person that has blood on their person or on an item, if those are moved around the residence and are in locations that are separate than where the actual trauma occurred, we can assess where individuals went, what they touched. And it's also a lot of times used as an investigative tool to confirm or refute statements that are made during the course of the investigation.
And the scientific basis for bloodstain pattern analysis, if you could describe that for the jury?
Bloodstain analysis, we call it BPA, really embraces the natural sciences. And the reason is because we, as analysts, are required and it's necessary for us to understand the natural sciences and how they play a role in bloodshedding events. The first would be biology, components of blood. The reason I understand components of blood is because later in the investigation I'm going to be using some chemical enhancement, and I have to understand what part of the blood I'm trying to enhance, why, and there's specific reasons why we choose different chemicals. Changes in appearance due to decomposition outside of the body. Sometimes decomposition can cause blood to turn, like in Florida, it can sometimes turn black. In colder environments, sometimes it turns orange. So if you're not aware of that, you might interpret stains that should have been included that were not. Also, we have to understand the reaction of a body to the infliction of an injury. And what I mean by that is, for example, an injury to an artery will produce different blood stains than a breach to a vein. And that's because they have a different purpose inside of your body. Also, capillaries bleed differently. We also have to understand where location of injury, internal bleeding, if we have any external factors like clothing or anything like that that might affect the body's reaction to the infliction of the injury. Physics. The thing about bloodstain analysis is it's just the blood is distributed how it's distributed at that moment. So if there's an impact or blood is struck with a force, it's going to react differently than if something just drips off of the end of this particular pointer. So, and that is due to cohesion and surface tension. We also have to understand the viscosity, and what basically viscosity is resistance to flow. And the best way for me to explain that is take maple syrup. And if you have maple syrup and it's in the refrigerator, it's very cold. And when you take it out, it's very difficult to pour. It's because it's viscous. It's got a lot of viscosity at that point. You introduce heat to it, you start to break up that viscosity, and then what happens to your maple syrup? It pours easier on your pancakes. So that's what viscosity is. Same thing for blood. If it's got another liquid that's introduced to it or different temperatures, it is going to react differently. Gravity and air resistance, which is a natural occurring phenomenon. Eventually, gravity, if allowed, can break the natural phenomenon of surface tension. And the introduction of outside forces and the effect that it will have on a particular blood stain. There are a variety of forces that can be introduced to a blood stain. We need to be aware of what those different introductions, such as gunshots or somebody getting kicked, those types of forces are completely different on the realm of how intense they are. So they produce different sized stains. Mathematics, when we attempt to locate the exact area of origin of where we believe an individual or a source of blood exactly was when it was impacted, we have to use trigonometry. It's based on the Pythagorean theorem, and it requires that we do a trigonomic type of mathematics. Chemistry, this goes back to understanding your components of blood. We have products that we use to enhance protein in your blood. A lot of those are used unseen because they're very easy to use and they're very effective. Or depending if you have more of a dynamic or a more damaged scenario with your blood, you might go for something a little more sensitive. That would be your heme product, and that reacts with the hemoglobin in your blood. So when we use these chemistries, we have to understand why we're using them. And the other thing is it's necessary for us to test the blood to make sure that it is in fact blood, because I don't want to be doing an analysis on ketchup. I would rather do analysis on blood. And then we have the enhancement techniques.
In identifying blood stains and blood stain patterns, are there differences that you can talk about between the difference of stains? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. Stains are basically categorized, and the best way for me to approach it is like trees in a forest. And a lot of our stains have a fundamental tree trunk. And then from that tree trunk, we have our branches. So when I say something like a passive drip stain, that is the trunk. But one of the branches of that tree trunk would in fact be something called a passive drip stain. And a passive drip stain is just that. You injure your finger and you're standing there over the sink trying to render aid and it's dripping down into the sink. That is a passive event. You're not inflicting any more force onto it, it's just dripping. Another branch would be what we call large volume stains. It's where a source of blood is just allowed to drip freely. And it will just flow with the natural topography of the floor or the substance that it is absorbed into. That's also passive, because you're not introducing any force to that. Then you also have another tree trunk, which are our transfer and our swipe stains. Now these have a minimal amount of force behind them, but not the kind of force that we use when we talk about spatter. Transfer is just that. If I have blood on my hands and I touch this counter, I will transfer blood from my hand to this counter if I have enough blood on my hand to do so, and if the blood is in fact wet. Also, along with the transfer is something called a swipe. And what a swipe basically is I have blood on an item or my hand, and I touch something and I move it. Basically, that is a swipe. So it's the introduction of me transferring blood, but also showing movement when I do it. Another complete different tree trunk is something called spatter. And that is caused by an external energy that disrupts the natural physics of surface tension and cohesion. So it is the introduction of an outside force. Gunshots, machinery accidents, explosions, stabbings, beatings, stompings. If you have a pool of blood on the floor and you drop something into it, those are all considered to be spatter events. Then we also have something called cast off, which is just like it sounds. It's blood drops that are released from a bloody item that is basically being flown. So if you have blood on the end of this pointer and I were to fling it back, blood will accumulate on the tip and eventually come back. And sometimes you can have corresponding cast-off patterns, which means if you have enough blood volume, you have blood that travels back and forward. So sometimes we get some distinct directionality in those cast-offs. Then we have another tree trunk, which would be altered stains. And the altered stains are typically pretty easy to identify because, as I stated earlier, blood is dispersed in millimeters of seconds. I don't even know the mathematical equation for it. So once it's dispersed, there's one way it happened. So when you start to go in and add liquids, it's going to look diluted. Skeletonization occurs when a drain or a stain starts to dry. Dries from the outside in. So the outside starts to dry and then the inside either becomes cracked or something comes in and removes part of the stain. So you have the peripheral edges around it, it's skeletonized. A void is where you have a continuous pattern of blood and then there's no blood at all, where blood should logically be. And what voids tell us is one of two things: that something was there in that area when the bloodshedding event occurred and has since been removed, or if there's a continuous blood pattern and something without blood is on top of it, that would be in addition to the scene. And then we would ask ourselves, why was there an addition? And then we have a wipe, and sometimes it's wipe and swipe gets confusing. A wipe is where a stain pre-exists on a surface and something comes through and disrupts it after it's already on the surface. So that's the difference between a swipe and a wipe.
Okay. I'd like to get into some case-specific examples, and just so that we're clear, we're going to see a number of photographs that are going to be shown. The photographs of which we're going to discuss are not photographs related to the course or the casework you did in this case. Is that correct?
Correct, they are not.
They are just examples of the things of which we're going to talk about.
Correct.
All right. It says here a passive drip stain. Could you describe this for the jury?
These are all considered passive drip stains, and they all look different. Well, the reason that they look different is because they're either all on a different surface or their directionality is different. So this particular passive drip stain over here on the top right-hand side would be is on like glass or marble. It's a very, very non-porous surface. It's very sheen. It's very clean, and it accepts the blood drop very nicely. Over here, this is also a passive drip stain, but this is on a mild piece of cardboard. So we have to take into consideration that when the blood actually was deposited on that, it was broken up a little bit by the coarseness of the cardboard. So concrete, we see concrete will do that, raw wood will break things up. So anything that has any type of porous nature or coarseness to it can alter the stain, but they're still considered to be passive. This is also a passive drip stain down here in the bottom. The difference is it's on a vertical surface as opposed to a horizontal. So this stain right here could have very easily been deposited if I had blood on my hands and I put my hands here, it could very easily, and that's still a passive stain, it's just on a different surface. And then this is considered passive drip trail. And you can see we have a little bit of scalloped edges. And that's just because that's on like a piece of tile that might have a little bit of coating on it so that you don't slip when you walk on it. So we have to take into consideration all of our surfaces.
Okay. Could you describe the flow pattern that's shown here in these photographs?
Flow pattern is also considered to be a passive stain, and it is basically where sufficient blood volume is able to drip down. So you see flow patterns with associated patterns that have a larger blood volume, which is usually indicative of further into the particular incident as it's occurring and more bloodshedding is occurring.
Okay, and then the second photograph shows that the stain is kind of moved a little bit. What would cause that?
Oh, that can be caused by the movement of the surface. If I was dripping low on this counter and I was dripping here and then I moved, that would cause an alteration in flow patterns. Sometimes we also see it maybe on vehicles where you have a flow pattern that comes down and the vehicle may come to an abrupt stop. It'll cause the flow pattern to jerk back and then start to flow down. So that would cause a minor alteration like that.
All right. And can you talk about transfer stains?
Transfer also has its own little branches that branch off of its big branch. And the two are non-comparable transfer or comparable transfer. And non-comparable transfer is just that. There's been a deposition of blood, but I have no idea what that's from. I mean, I do because I made it, but if I was to see this at a scene, I wouldn't know what that was, and I would just call it a non-comparable transfer stain. As opposed to transfer stain up here with what we call ridge detail, which is basically your fingerprints are on the bottom of your feet, the ridges that keep you from, allow you to grasp things. And then this would be a comparable transfer print, and we would call that consistent with a shoe print or a boot print or some type of footwear because of its distinct delineated lines and evenly separated voids.
All right. Can you talk about large volume stains?
Large volume stains, there are two. Basically, they occur under the same phenomenon, which is where blood source is allowed to flow freely. The difference is one is into an absorbent material, that would be saturation. The other is on a liquid surface that's doesn't have very much porous nature to it, or is completely non-porous, and then you get a pool of blood.
All right. Can you describe for the jury these photographs reference to spatter?
These are stains that are consistent with an event that is much stronger than any type of passive event. So these are the types of stains that we look for when we're looking for an impact event. And as you can see from just these two photos, they look completely different. And the reason they look completely different is because there are so many variables that come into play when you have a spatter event. The location of the injury, the amount of injury, the amount of blood available. Is there clothing, or is there some type of item or something obscuring the ability for the spatter to be dispersed? We also take into consideration the amount of force that is applied to that. Unlike a gunshot where if you have rapid successive fire, the gun is designed to function that it maintains a certain amount of force when it fires. Humans can't do that. Not many humans, when you start to physically exert yourself in an impact event, you will eventually tire. So it's not uncommon for us to see very, very, very small stains. And then we start to get a mixture of larger stains, and that just shows somebody starting to tire, or your victim has stopped moving, or the range of motion has become less available. So that's why there's a variation of stains when it comes to spatter.
Okay. Can you describe, excuse me, can you describe the spatter stains that are observed in this picture?
This is also impact spatter, but this is on fabric. So fabric, as you can see, different things can happen because of the nature of which textiles are developed. Basically, your clothing is designed to either completely reject the introduction of a liquid, or it's designed to accept it and make it wick out. So that's why sometimes spatter looks a little bit different on clothing. And one of the things we do with spatter on clothing is we look at it microscopically, because we have to look at how the stains impact or how they interact with the fabric, and that allows me to make a more scientific determination of which that would in fact be spatter as opposed to something else.
Can you describe to the jury the cast-off stains that are observed here?
Yes. Once again, this is cast-off, and these two types of cast-off patterns look completely different. And the reason is it's because of the way an item was swung and the area that the blood is coming off of. So for example, these patterns here would be considered linear because they are thinner in width. They don't have a lot of width to them. So it would be, a perfect example would be at the tip of this particular pointer. That would be the blood coming off the tip of the pointer. Because if I'm swinging the pointer this way, the blood is collecting down here on the tip and being flung off the tip. Now these stains here are different. This is more of a sideways swing of an instrument. And that's not uncommon in a beating or a stabbing incident because the weapon itself, if allowed, will become bloody and will start to slip. So you'll start to see a rotation in the instrument. So this pointer can in fact also cause those particular cast-off stains because now if I swing like this and I'm swinging straight down instead of down this way, the blood is accumulating along the length of it as opposed to the tip, and it's being flung down this way. So the cast-off is actually coming off of a greater width of the pointer as opposed to the tip. And all that basically tells me is a change in swinging motion or a change in the handling of a particular item.
Directionality. Can you describe what's being represented here in these two photographs?
Directionality is very, very important in blessing analysis because that is how we base a lot of our determination of where the direction of force is coming from and things like that. Directionality basically tells us the way, the direction the blood was traveling when it touched and hit the surface. And we do that by looking at tails. We call these tadpole stains, and we look at the tadpole tail, and that's what we look at to determine directionality. So this stain was traveling that way when it hit that surface. This is a spatter pattern, which looks completely different than the spatter patterns you already saw, but it is another spatter pattern. And the spatter pattern itself also allows us to determine the directionality of not only the stains, but the directionality of the pattern itself, and also allows us to really kind of come in here and tell you, okay, see this conical nature or fan of the spatter pattern? If you were to draw lines through these particular stains that I've done such here, they will eventually come together and merge, and that is your area of origin. So that's how we can place victims in certain areas based on spatter patterns.
All right. Just so we're clear, the tail is the way it points into the direction of the stain, correct?
Yeah, the stain was traveling, they were all traveling this way when they were dispersed.
All right, could you talk to us about swipe stains and what's represented in these two photographs?
This is a swipe stain. It looks different than a traditional transfer stain because both of these show movement. We have something here called a feathering. And what that feathering is usually have a large distribution of blood at one end. And if you don't have a replenishing source, like if it's on your hand but your hand's not cut, you're eventually going to run out of blood. And that's what the feathering does. And this is also considered feathering, where you can see a large volume up here, and then as it comes down, it starts to feather because there's no more blood volume left.
And can you discuss these two photographs and the diluted nature of the stains?
These are diluted stains, and this one also has something called a little bit of diffusion. Dilution is where you have a blood stain, and then there's the introduction of water or a liquid. It could be any liquid, lighter fluid, water, anything you can think of, milk. So what it does is it alters the original visual consistency of the stain. Basically, it dilutes it. It mixes with the blood, and the blood is no longer viscous. It's been mixed with something else, and it loses a lot of its very dark red nature. And it's very indicative of a diluted stain when you see the dark rim on the edge. This is also a diluted stain, but you also have something here called diffusion. This area right here is diffusion, which is the natural tendency of the fabric to want to wick away that particular stain. That's what we call wicking. But then there was also an introduction of a different type of liquid, which calls this other pattern out here around it.
All right, we have two photographs here. Can you describe for the jury what represented in these two photographs?
These are perfect examples of wipes. This is a passive drip stain where something came through it after it had started to dry and wiped right through it. And then this is the same thing. This is a smaller pool of blood where something came through and wiped through and altered the original pooled blood and original passive drip stain.
And you mentioned earlier about skeletized stains. Is that what's represented in these two photographs?
Yes, these are both skeletonized stains. This one is because of a direct alteration or interruption to the stain while it was drying by not something else coming into contact with it and removing the center. This one is due to the natural decaying process where the blood has dried and is starting to flake. Oh.
You mentioned earlier about voids. Is that what's shown here in these two photographs?
Yes, it's the absence of blood and otherwise continuous blood stain pattern.
Can you show the jury what we're talking about? Point to where the void was and what that means.
This would be the void here because this pattern would be considered a continuous pattern because the stains and the distribution of them are relatively the same. We have larger stains confined to this area, smaller stains are coming out, and then all of a sudden we have this, all of a sudden something's missing. There's no blood stains there. So something linear was here. In this particular pattern, same thing. We have a continuous blood pattern, and then we have very delineated lines where there was no blood at all. So something was in that particular area and was removed as if something was there and also removed.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Cox. I'm going to ask for some help with this for a second. And while we're doing that, Ms. Cox, I'm going to hand you this. And then I'm going to ask if you could just step over to the podium, although we're going to stay, we're going to keep this up. I'm going to show you a collection of photographs. For the record, I've shown defense counsel the photographs 514 through 530 and 534 and 536. I'm going to show you with the pre-marked as states exhibits 514 through 530, 534 through 563. They're each paper clip, so if you could just keep them in the same groupings, I'll make everything just good. Cox, so you step back right over here to where you were a few minutes ago, and let me just ask you some questions about some of the things that you reviewed in the case that was presented to you, the case which you're here to testify about. Can you describe for the jury the things that you reviewed as part of your review of the case?
I review the crime scene photographs. I review the autopsy photographs. I review the medical examiner's official autopsy reports. I review the crime scene technician's reports. I review the crime scene detective's reports, the detective that was present at the crime scene while the technicians were working. I review property and evidence lists, and then I conduct an evidence review myself on items that are pertinent and document all that myself as well.
And by documenting that yourself, you need to go to Pasco County Sheriff's Office and actually look at the physical items.
Yes, I actually remove the items from the evidence and I document them and analyze them personally.
And as part of that documentation, taking photographs, the ones you just reviewed.
Yes.
And referring to states exhibits 514 through 530 and 534 through 563, are these photographs of items that were collected by the Sheriff's Office that you reviewed with them?
Yes.
Okay. Your Honor, at this time, the state would seek to admit 514 through 530 and then 534 through 563 is the next items of evidence.
513 is not in there?
514
Okay.
through 534. Yes. We will have that one later.
Later?
Okay.
Defense, any objection?
No objection, Your
All
Honor.
right, 514 through 530 is admitted.
Okay. As part of your review, did you have an opportunity to look at a diagram of the residence located at 7719 Hatteras Drive?
I did.
Okay. What I'd like to do, Ms. Cox, is I'd like to talk about the things that you reviewed from the Sheriff's Office and all the items you reviewed, but I'd like to kind of go by a room-by-room analysis of the things you looked at, okay?
Okay.
I would like to start with the room that's identified on State's Exhibits 59 as Room A, also referred to as the southeast bedroom, okay? Did you review photographs related to that room?
I did.
All right. Specifically, items that were inside the room that were, well, let's just start with this. This is State's Exhibit, and Mr. Frager, if you could just tell me.
163.
Okay, I'm going to ask you to look at the monitor and look at State's Exhibit 163. Did you have an opportunity to view this photograph?
I did.
Just give me 1 second. All right. Were there things of particular note in this photograph?
The primary thing that was noted in this particular photograph was the overall dimensions of the room as well as location of items in the room, the curtains on the window, a dresser, and then there was a 3-tier bookshelf and like a CD case that was over in the corner.
And this is the 3-tier bookshelf you're talking about?
Correct, it's right there.
And then this was?
That's like a DVD or CD storage shelving unit. And of note, on the raw wood floor, it was just a sublet floor, was a large saturation stain.
All right, just since we're starting to talk about saturation stains, could you just remind the jury what that means?
An item that was bleeding was allowed to bleed freely there for a period of time such that it was absorbed into the sublet flooring.
And in accordance to the DNA reports from FDA, did you have an opportunity to review those?
I did.
And what did that tell us about that stain?
That stain was identified to Nicholas Leonard.
Okay. And this is State's Exhibit?
This is 164.
State's Exhibit 164. Can you just describe what's shown here?
That is a close-up of the saturation stain. And basically what I can analyze from that is that it was allowed to follow the topography of the floor. So the saturation was there long enough to be able to saturate into and follow the natural topography of that particular area of the sublet flooring.
Okay.
174.
All right, now I'm going to show you what introduces State's Exhibit 174. What is this item?
This is a window fan.
Okay. And this was an item that was actually collected by the Sheriff's Office, correct?
Yes.
And when you did your own document review, you had an opportunity to go and actually physically look at this.
I did.
All right, so I'd like to refer to some of the photographs that you took in relation to this.
553.
State's Exhibit 553. All right, ma'am, could you describe what we're looking at here in State's 553?
There were actually 3 different types of stains on this one particular item. We'll start out with the ones that are the largest, which would be your passive drip stains. So those are passive drip stains that are located in this particular area right here. We have some passive drip stains here and here. And then you have a little bit of pooling down here where there was enough blood volume that it was allowed to actually coagulate and remain here along the little lip edge of the fan. What you can't see in this particular photo were items that I was interested in that might be related to an actual blood-shedding event, and that would be my spatter and my cast-off. And I did find indications of both of those on this particular fan.
All right, we're going to refer to, what is this?
550.
550.
This is my photo. This is what I took at the evidence review and identified it as number 1 with a green marker. These are actually impact stains, and they are located up in the top corner of the fan. And the reason these are impact stains is they have that very distinct directionality, very elongated stains, and they're very small in size. And this particular area, their stains are pretty consistent in size, so that I felt comfortable saying that they came from a spatter event.
Okay. And what would cause that?
That would be consistent with impact. That would be consistent with spatter.
Okay.
549.
I'm going to ask you to look at State's 549. Can you describe the things that are shown in this photograph?
This is actually a mid-range shot of where those stains are, so you can just barely see the green corner of my marker there. So this gives you a general idea and location of the fan. So if this is the top of the fan, you can see one of the fan blades over here. These stains are over here in the corner, and you can see there are multiple ones over here. We choose specific stains as a representative stain for closer identifications because we can't physically document every single spatter stain. I still do that.
Okay. You mentioned there was a collection of multiple types of stains on this item. And just sort of comparing to what you just entitled impact with these stains located in the top of the photograph, what would that be?
That would be passive, and they look completely different. These are very small, very elongated. They are clustered into a small area together. These are passive drip stains, which are just caused by the blood being allowed to drip freely down without being any force being projected onto it.
All right, ma'am. Can you show us next?
552.
This is States 552. Can you just describe what's shown here in States 552?
This is the bottom middle portion of the fan. You can see one of the blade fan areas over here and one of the blade areas over here. This is also a spatter pattern right here. You've got what we call your conical nature to it. So basically you have stains that radiate from this particular area and down to this particular area, causing one particular pattern. All the stains have directionality moving this particular way, so that would be consistent with an impact spatter event.
All right. Next photograph, please.
It's like 554.
And that is my scale. I identified that area as number 2 with a green marker and placed the scale there for size measurement.
Okay.
551.
This is an overall photograph to kind of identify overall where those stains were in relationship to each other. So this would be the area up here where number 1 was, and then you can see down here is where number 2 is.
548.
That's kind of that. Can you describe it to us? It's kind of that same area.
It's the same area, except I'm also showing underneath the fan blades, and I'm also showing these stains and relationship to the other stains on the fan, just for documentation purposes and for my analysis purpose.
All right. I mean, were you able to review the FDLE DNA reports related to this particular item?
I did.
And what can you tell us about those results as it relates to this item?
Stains on that fan came back to being Nicholas Leonard.
Staying in this southeast bedroom, room A, was there a chair in the room that was of particular note?
Yes.
Okay. Why did you take particular note of this chair?
This chair was of interest to me
Now,
because...
stop real quick. I just need to get the identification of the photograph. I apologize.
556.
556.
Do you want to move in those pictures? I haven't moved in
Second half.
534 to 563.
At this time, Judge, we would move those in.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
It'll be so moved 534 to 563. Go ahead.
Sorry. Could you repeat the number again for Brian?
556.
556. Thank you. What was a particular note as it relates to this chair?
The first thing that was of interest for me in this chair was the fact that it was propped up against the west side of the closet inside the southeast bedroom, room A. And in looking at the crime scene photos, I was immediately drawn to the fact that there were passive drip stains that were on the seat of this chair. Well, the passive drip stains, their appearance was not consistent with it being folded up when those passive drip stains were deposited. So immediately I think, okay, well, the passive drip stains were deposited most likely when this chair was in the open position. Then it was moved, it was closed, and set up against this wall. And the confirmation of that came when I looked at the areas that one would logically touch when you fold up a chair. That would be the sides and the back. And there were, in fact, corresponding transfer stains. The other thing that allowed me to opine that it had been moved to the location it was found in was because there was no what we call reciprocating stains that was in the direct area the chair was that were the same as the stains that were here. So I opined that it had been in a different location, it was open, and subsequently after receiving these drips, these passive drip stains had been folded up and moved.
Can you show us the next photograph?
555.
Is this what you were describing here? Can you detail that out for the jury?
That is a transfer stain along the side, and then there's some up here along the rim up here at the top.
557.
That's
a close-up of the transfer stain on the side.
All right. And there was also stains along the top.
And there were also stains along the top.
Having reviewed the FDLE DNA reports specifically related to that item, what can you tell the jury about the blood that was found on that?
That belonged to Nicholas Leonard.
There were some other photographs taken of this southeast bedroom. This is State's Exhibit.
State's Exhibit 178.
This is that three-tier bookshelf that was discussed. Were you able to, when you view the photographs we're looking at here are printouts, correct?
Correct.
When you actually view the photographs, are they provided to you in a digital format?
Yes.
And being in a digital format, are you able to zoom in to the photo itself?
Yes, I am.
Okay. I'd like to talk about some of the things that you found on this bookshelf. Can you describe, upon your examination, what you found?
The three-tier bookshelf, the scale there in the middle of the second tier identifies a transfer stain. And I looked at that, and because the transfer stain had been identified on there, I zoomed into all of the remaining portions of the item and identified what I drew a conclusion to be spatter stains to be located right over here on this particular area of the three-tier shelving unit, right here next to this particular pole.
Okay. And as it relates to the photograph that's shown at the bottom, which is State's Exhibit?
That is 179.
State's Exhibit 179. In reviewing the FDLE DNA reports related specifically to this this swipe or this swab from this location, can you tell the jury what you learned about this area?
It tested positive for Nicholas Leonard's blood.
Okay.
Uh, 180 and 181.
All right, now let's start with 180. Can you just put 180? 180 is this photograph that's closest to you, ma'am, and 181 is right here. If you could just, is that right? Correct? Yes. Thank you. Can you describe for the jury where these photographs were taken in room 1A, for room A, excuse me?
They are in room A, they're in the closet, and they are located on this side of the wall, right here.
Okay.
And they are consistent. There was 2 stains, and they were consistent in size and appearance, location, distribution with cast off. And this right here, this other exhibit, is a close-up of one of the stains. It has a very distinguished tail. The tail is broken off of the particular blood stain, which is consistent with the surface that it's on. And the other thing that's important about this particular blood stain in and of itself is its directionality. It is actually traveling from the bedroom into the closet. And because of its directionality, that would indicate to me that the item that this was flung off of was swinging towards the closet.
$233.
All right, ma'am, I'm showing you what's been introduced as State's 233. Can you describe for the jury what type of stain we're looking at here?
This is a very small saturation stain, and it's right below the east window, and you can see the 3-tier shelving unit that I was speaking of earlier.
$169.
All right, ma'am. This is State's 169. This photograph may be a slightly difficult to place its location, but having looked at all the photographs, can you tell the jury where this photograph comes from in relation to the diagram?
This is at the threshold to the bedroom, so it's on the sublet flooring. So the sublet flooring is this raw wood here, and we have tile that it basically butts up against. So that would be right here, in this area right here in this threshold, and they are passive drip stains.
Okay. And what does that mean?
That those were dripped by a natural occurring phenomenon of gravity.
All right. And having reviewed the FDLE analyst report related to the DNA, and specifically as to the swabbings taken from that location, what can you tell the jury about the nature of that stain?
The DNA report confirmed it was Nicholas Leonard's blood.
Okay. All right. I think we're done with the southeast bedroom. So now, ma'am, I'd like to kind of move down from the southeast bedroom down to and I'm going to refer to State's Exhibit 59. I'd like to change floors and change room. And I'd like to talk about the west garage, this room located right here in State's Exhibit 58. All right? Were there items that were collected from this room that were of particular note to you?
Yes.
Did you actually go out and look at some of these items at the sheriff's office?
I did.
All right. If you could show me do we have an overall of the room? This is State's Exhibit
317.
317. Primarily, I'm referring to the wicker baskets that are located here and the white containers that are, and black containers that are located right here. Okay? Did you have an opportunity? It's okay.
Sorry about that.
Happens. So I'd like to talk about some of the analysis that was related to that. Were there photographs taken of the individual stains that were on there?
There were.
Okay. And were you able to look at those individual stains?
I was.
All right.
334 and 335.
All right. Let's talk about the wicker basket. The 334 and 335 states, and it indicated here as X as the photo marker indicates. Did you have an opportunity to examine these items in person?
Yes.
Can you describe was there blood present on these items?
Yes, when I viewed these photographs that had been taken at the scene, which I then determined that I wanted to look at it closer to see if I could differentiate and see if there was any spatter stains on them.
Right, were you able to do that?
I was.
And upon examining the stains that were on this basket, what can you tell the jury about what you observed?
There were spatter stains on that encompassed almost the entire front side of the basket, and then on one side there was one tiny little spatter stain that actually was on the side of it. And the reason that is important because it kind of allows me to orient where the spatter was coming from in relation to the basket. So the front of the basket was primarily facing towards the bloodshedding event.
Okay.
518.
That's kind of what we're looking here at States 518, a photograph that you took. Your examination of this, I'll call it this side or this face of the basket, you're saying that this side was facing the bloodshedding event.
Yes, it was facing the bloodshedding event and was slightly turned just a bit because there's one little stain over there.
Okay. And were you able to, let's go to the next photograph.
516.
516, and this is what we're talking about right here, this separate stains that you found.
Yes, so this would be the front of the basket that has the multiple stains that were visible from the scene photographs. And then upon viewing the actual basket myself, I identified one stain over here that was also consistent with spatter.
So it was kind of, that side was somewhat facing the event as well too.
Not too much, because there was not a whole lot of other reciprocating stains over here, but there was that one, so it kind of was tilted just a little bit.
Okay.
521.
All right, now let's talk about the actual stains that you observed on this item. What can you tell the jury about the type of stains that were there?
This is the one stain over here on the side that I was just talking about. It has very distinct directionality that's traveling almost completely horizontally on this particular item. And it has your very distinct tadpole appearance with the tail pointing directionality away from the front of the basket.
Okay.
517.
All right. All right, ma'am. What can you tell us about some of the stains that are represented here in this item?
Now, one of the things that we also look for in spatter that we will find sometimes in a spatter event is you will also find, sometimes you'll find circular small stains that are also considered to be part of the spatter event. And the reason is because at that point, the source of blood is in close proximity to that particular item such that when the impact event occurs, when the blood is distributed, it typically comes out in a conical formation if it's allowed to, if there's not something obstructing it. So what you'll get is at your area of origin, where the source of blood is, you'll get very direct circular stains because that's exactly where the source is. Well, because the blood also wants to exercise itself out into a conical nature, you'll get that fan or that conical appearance. So it's not uncommon to have small circular stains with radiating stains out around it. And that's exactly what I saw on this particular item. The front of this item exhibited a lot of those small circular stains, and then down at the bottom and up at the top is where you start to get your radiating conical stains that have that real distinct directionality.
And what does that tell you about the location of this basket as it relates to the other?
It was in close proximity to a bloodshedding event, and that the source of blood at some point was close to the center portion area of this particular wicker basket.
519.
This is states 519. This is a kind of a top view of the liquor basket. What can you tell us about the stains that you observed here?
These stains are actually the ones that are starting to show the conical direct upward directionality. So they're not completely circular. They are starting to show a definition where you're getting a little bit of a tail up here. So that is, and that's at the top. So the source of blood was a little bit lower, and the blood was able to radiate upward.
Okay.
520.
Sorry. This is states 520.
Correct.
All right, ma'am. Could you tell us about the stains that are represented here in states 520?
Here you have more of your circular stains, and then you're starting to get your stains with radiating directionality outward from them. So that just would be considered part of that spatter event.
All right. So this item was near the blood shedding event, correct?
It was near an impact bloodshedding event, yes.
An impact. And this item was, you actually saw how big was it?
It was like a clothes hamper size. So,
All right.
and there was tape on it, so I think maybe it was maybe 3 feet.
Okay. And so the events that occurred had to be close to that at that height.
Correct.
318 and 325.
All right, and we're going to talk about these items. Oop, do that. All right, thank you. 318 and 325. These were items that were photographed on scene, and you had an opportunity to view each photograph as it relates to each individual stain, correct?
Correct.
This is an item that was marked as SM137. We refer to it a lot because there were a number of swabs taken from this item. Is that correct?
Yes.
And in viewing the stains that were related to this, what can you tell the jury about the stains that you saw in the photographs of this?
As I recall, I identified them as spatter stains
Okay.
and or cast off. I have to refer to my report specifically.
Did you need to do that?
I would love to do that.
Sure.
Okay. I identified them as spatter.
Okay. And having reviewed the FDLE reports related to the swabs that were collected from this item, what can you tell this jury about the blood evidence that was on this item?
It tested positive for the blood of Nicholas Leonard.
377.
All right. All right, ma'am, I'd like to show you states 377. It's a photograph of some boxes that were collected from the west garage. They were located, why don't you show the jury, you've seen the photographs, why don't you tell the jury where those were located at in the diagram, states 58.
These were located in the west garage along this wall over here, along the east wall. There was a refrigerator, a cooler, a large trash can, and these boxes were adjacent among those particular items.
Okay. Did you have an opportunity to view the boxes at the sheriff's office?
I did.
When you viewed them, they were flattened, is that correct?
Correct.
And in doing so, did you take photographs of those?
I did.
All right. Show.
$522.
States 522. All right, do you see evidence of blood stains on this item?
Yes, I identified, this was the bottom box, and this is a flap on the bottom box. And the stains here had been identified on the scene by the technician who documented this item. And these are a series of cast-off stains with some passive drip stains that are adjacent to them or among the cast-off stains. So these elongated stains here would be cast off, whereas these larger stains here are considered to be passive.
All right. And having reviewed the FDLE reports as it relates to the DNA evidence collected from these boxes, what can you tell the jury about the DNA that was on these boxes?
It was identified as Nicholas Leonard.
Thank you. Mrs. States.
523 and 524.
523 and 524 now. Can you describe for what we're seeing in these photographs?
This is the top of the flap on the upper box. And these are cast-off stains. And this is two separate cast-off patterns. And I identified them with a large scale. These are kind of like the cast-off patterns I showed you earlier that aren't necessarily linear. They're more, had a longer surface of which to come off of, and they were distributed on top of the back box.
Okay. Thank you. I think we're done with for this time we're gonna move from the west garage. Oh, one more set of photographs. Forgive me.
541.
Yes, ma'am. In reviewing the evidence, there was a mattress top that was collected, correct?
Yes.
And having reviewed the reports, it was in a trash bag. Do you remember where that was located in the house?
It was located in the west garage, over near where the, what we were just talking about, where the items were over here. They were trash bags that were kind of piled up over here in this general area.
Okay. Can you zoom out a little bit for me, please? A little more, all the way out. All right, ma'am. When you went to the sheriff's office, did you have an opportunity to really open it up and take a look at it?
I did.
Okay. Did you spend some time looking at the stains that were located on this mattress top?
I did.
All right. This is kind of an overall picture, State's Exhibit
541.
541. Let's start with just a general description of what you had, and then we'll get into some of the more specific stains that you observed. What can you tell the jury about the appearance of the stains that are located here?
This mattress top had a whole lot going on with it. One of the stains that I was most drawn to at first was the saturation stain that's basically in the center of the mattress top. And what's the significance of that is a blood source was allowed to lay there for a period of time after incurring bleeding injuries. So that was the first thing that drew my attention. And then, as you look around, there are stains and patterns that radiate out away from that central saturation stain. What is interesting about those is they radiate uniformly around the saturation stain here. And then all of a sudden, down here at the bottom of the saturation stain, there's nothing. So that's void. Because I have a very uniform distribution of multiple stains that are not broken up, very consistent, and then I have nothing. So I felt comfortable in opining that that was most likely where the body of Mr. Leonard was laid, and that as the blunt trauma event was occurring, there was very little movement on his part because the impact stains that are in blue, they're the little blue markers with the little blue arrows, are basically on either side of this. And they have that very traditional conical radiating pattern. There's two of them here.
So let me start with the blue, because you marked this with photo markers, correct?
Yes, I use a number, letter, and color because it's just easier for me.
All right. And so we're talking about the blue ones first. You identified the blue stains as what?
As impact spatter.
All right. And I just wanted to make sure we're clear on that, because you're going to soon reference some of the other ones. Continue about what else you see in this photograph.
The other thing I see are distinct linear cast-off patterns that also gravitate around this entire saturation pattern. And the interesting thing is that there were 5 distinct ones that I felt comfortable in identifying as 5 distinct individual cast-off patterns. And they also radiate out away from the pattern. And the way that I have identified those so that they're not confused with the impact spatter is they have orange stickers. And the beginning of the patterns are designated by the L scales. And then there's little orange stickers that help you to see the length and the individual stains that are part of that particular pattern. So you would have, there's a pattern here, there's a pattern up here, there's a pattern here, there's a pattern here. Then there's also a pattern which is all the way at the corner, kind of off by itself, which was interesting because there was some cast-off stains in the bedroom I believe decided to be in. That would be consistent with that.
Okay. Let's kind of go dig a little bit deeper into some of the things that you observed. What's the next?
543.
543. All right, ma'am. Can you describe what we're, in relation to what you were talking about a minute ago, what do you see represented here in this photograph?
This is just a close-up. You can see a little portion of the saturation stain down here. And then these are this is the blue marker. This is my number 2 of the 2 patterns I identified. And I have used the blue arrows to help define the conical fan-like nature of the impact spatter pattern. So those stains look very different in appearance than they do to this particular stain, which is in the orange, which is more linear and is your cast-off. The other thing that's of interest about these particular stains is these are smaller in nature and are traveling out away from the saturation stain.
Okay, so you have a good mixture of both cast-off and impact here.
That's correct.
540.
All right. Can you describe for the jury what's represented here in states 540?
This is a cast-off stain I labeled as area A that is next to the actual saturation stain. What is of interest of this particular pattern is that it's altered. There appears to be either wiping or dilution that has been introduced to those particular stains.
Okay. And this is a cast-off stain?
Correct.
All right.
539.
This is an overall view of the stains in relationship to each other. So you can see that the impact spatter stain remains relatively close to the actual saturation stain where it's located, as opposed to the cast-offs, which actually radiate out away from the cast-off or away from the saturation stain. And this stain in particular here, this cast-off stain is a very traditional linear cast-off stain and it's got darker volume of blood in it. And it has distinct directionality traveling out away from the saturation stain.
The fact that that cast-off stain has darker saturation, can you gain any insight as to what would cause that?
There's 2 possibilities based on the dynamics of this scene in particular. One is that at the time that cast-off was distributed, the item that distributed the cast-off was heavily saturated with blood and was able to deposit stains with significant more volume than some of the other stains, or it did not receive any dilution. It was not altered like some of these stains that you see down here.
Okay. Next photograph, please.
538.
Okay. States 538, kind of moving around this main saturation stain. Excuse me. Can you describe what you see here in the stain?
This is, once again, just an overall showing the relationship, and this is actually a better picture that shows the relationship of the spatter stains that are relatively close to the actual saturation stain, and how the cast-off stains actually radiate out at varying areas around the saturation stain, and they radiate out away from the saturation stain. The interesting thing about showing their relationship to each other indicates movement of the particular item that was flinging the blood.
Okay, so movement not of the person, but maybe of the actual item.
Of the item that is flinging this blood was being swung in varying motions and varying ranges, as opposed to where the impact spatter is very confined around the saturation stain. I do not get the feeling that the source of this blood moved very much at all during the blood event on this particular item.
537.
All right. States 537. This is that heavily saturated cast-off we were talking about.
Yes.
Okay. Show the next photograph.
536.
Can you describe what we're seeing here in 536?
These are just more overall photographs
Of that.
of with the cast-off pattern in relation to a impact stain.
And the next photograph.
555.
Back into that.
Yes, a more general photograph showing distinct differences in the patterns.
All right, and the next photograph.
534.
All right.
That's a close-up of the spatter stain identified as area 1. What's interesting about it is it doesn't have as many stains in it as the other one, but it still has your conical pattern radiating out away from the saturation stain, and the pattern and the stains radiate out away from the saturation.
All right.
542.
All right. New area. Let's talk about states 542. Can you describe for the jury, I guess, where on the mattress is this, and then what is represented by way of stains on this area?
This cast-off pattern was on the corner of the mattress pad, and it was actually off by itself. It was away from the other patterns that were kind of confined around it. And the conclusion that can be drawn from that is there was a longer range of motion with the item when it was being swung that caused that saturation pain, or excuse me, that cast-off stain to be so much further away.
How would that work? Can you explain why a longer range of motion would cause that?
Because the item itself has been allowed to travel further. So for example, if I have this particular item and my range of motion is controlled to this as opposed to this, you
Okay.
can see where the further back I go and the further up I go with the item, the further the cast off is allowed to travel, as opposed if you have more deliberate, more confined movement, your cast off pattern is limited to the swinging of the item.
Okay. You also mentioned that there was other evidence that you observed in the southeast bedroom. I'll go back to States Exhibit 59. That was kind of the interplay between that corner and this room.
561.
Yes.
Okay. And what are we looking at here in States 561?
This is one of the curtains that was hanging on the south window in room A. And when I looked at these items, I identified a cast-off pattern on this curtain.
Okay. And that's what you marked here with your photo markers?
Yes, I believe these are yellow. And then there's a transfer stain that's also near this cast-off. And then there was another stain over here a little bit further away that I identified with a marker.
Okay.
560.
This just shows that when the cast-off was distributed on this particular curtain, that it was in a distinct downward directionality, because you have very, very distinct the beginning of your blood stain and then your elongated tail. And the other thing that tells me is because the stain in itself is so elongated and so long that the item that was being swung was close to that curtain.
559.
This was just a stain that I used little markers in the middle of the pattern to help identify individual stains. And this is another stain with exactly the same dynamics to it. It has downward distribution to it. And what's interesting, it has a little bit of a blood volume that coagulated down here at the bottom of it.
Okay.
558.
This was also a drip stain or a cast-off stain that I actually identified as cast-off that was on the kind of the side away from the very elongated pattern.
All right. Just one moment, Your Honor. All right. All right, Ms. Cox, we've kind of gone from the upstairs southeast bedroom down to the west garage. I'd like to return.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we need a restroom break. So we'll go ahead and take you into the jury room and remind you not to talk about the case. And whenever you all are ready, let me know.
still in this master bedroom area. Do you see, I guess, in the overall picture where stain MBRF was located at?
Yes, I do.
Could you identify it for the jury, please?
It is located between the bed and the dresser over here on the floor. You can see this is the tile walkway that provides access to the closet, and this is the general area that this particular stain was located at.
Okay, and upon reviewing the FDLE DNA analyst report, were they able to identify this? What type of stain is that, I guess I should ask first?
That's a very small stain consistent with impact.
Okay. And were they able to identify the DNA associated with that impact stain?
Yes, it was identified as Megan Brown.
Okay. Thank you.
199, 198.
Thank you. States 199 and 198. I'd like to, again, this is kind of an overall photograph of the floor of the master bedroom. Like I see you identified there is that tile walkway that leads to the bedroom. And were you able to analyze the stain that was located at the photo marker MBRE?
Yes, that photo marker identified the stain that's located here at the foot of the bed, and that is also consistent in appearance, size, and shape with impact stain.
And upon reviewing the FDLE DNA analyst report, were they able to identify the blood as it relates to that impact stain?
Yes, it was identified to Megan Brown.
205, 206.
Okay, there we go. States 205 and states 206. Where on states 59, the diagram, is this stain located at?
This stain is actually at the threshold of the master bedroom closet, and that closet is located right here in relationship to the bedroom. So this would be the tile walkway I identified earlier, and this would be the entrance into that closet area.
Okay. And referring to the close-up of MBCA, were you able to analyze that area to determine whether or not what type of stain that was?
That I identified that as a transfer stain that has been altered due to dilution.
A transfer stain.
Correct.
And how can you zoom in a little bit on that for me, Mr. Shribby? Okay, can you just describe what allowed you to say that's a transfer stain?
You've got the dynamics here of broken peripheral. It doesn't have any distinct markings. It's faint. It's got more blood volume in one area than the other.
Okay. And upon reviewing the FDLE analyst report related to the swabs collected from this location, were they able to identify the DNA that was collected from this area?
Yes, it came back to belonging to Nicholas Leonard.
You can go inside the closet.
Uh, 215.
250?
215.
215. That's a little out of focus, Mr. Brady. If you could fix that for me, it's a little out of focus. Ma'am, page 215 shows a stain inside of the closet, which you've just identified. What can you tell us about the nature of this stain?
That is a saturation stain. That is also sublet flooring, and that is inside the closet.
All right. And maybe not shown in this photograph, but there are other photographs where they actually removed the piece of plywood. Is that correct?
Yes.
And did they take pictures of I guess the trusses underneath the subfloor?
I believe they did, yes.
And could you see whether or not the saturation moved through this subfloor to the support?
I recall seeing a photograph where a truss was saturated with blood. I can't recall if it was in the room A or if it was in the closet.
Okay. Being in the closet, were there other items of clothing? You can see some in the photograph, and there's a shoe rack there. Was there a item of note that was collected from the closet that you analyzed for a blood stain?
562.
562.
Yes, in the original photographs that I viewed that were taken of the scene, there were documentation of shoes that were on that white wire shoe rack that was directly adjacent to that saturation stain. And this was actually one of the shoes that was in very close proximity to that saturation stain, and it was up on that wire shoe holder, and it has a visible transfer stain along here. You can see along the seam line here, and then a little bit of it, it had enough blood volume such that it was able to coagulate a little bit down here where the sole of the shoe actually meets the fabric.
All right.
States 514.
All right, I'm going to show you what's been introduced to states.
I'm sorry, let's start with 513.
513.
Yes.
What is this item?
This was identified as a blanket that was found in the east garage.
Okay, just looking at State's Exhibit 58. East garage is located over here.
Correct.
Okay. And this is a photograph that you took at the sheriff's office.
That's correct.
Kind of laid it out to look at it, correct?
I did.
Did you find evidence of blood stains that were a particular note for you?
Identified, one of the stains that immediately drew my attention was this large saturation stain right here at this portion of the blanket. And basically that saturation stain indicates that an item was allowed to bleed in freely for a period of time. But in analyzing the rest of this particular item, I noticed that there was a spatter stain that was on this particular item that would not have been available in the condition that it was documented at the scene to receive a spatter pattern. So it was of great interest to me.
Are you saying the way that, because the original photographs on scene show that this blanket is kind of wrapped around itself, correct?
Yes, this blanket is actually identified in an area with a rug, and it's kind of all crumpled together. And there are portions of this rug, or excuse me, this item that are visible protruding out from the rug, but it's primarily the areas of saturation and some of the transfer stains around.
Photograph.
514.
What's shown here in States 514?
This is the area that I identified as the spatter pattern. And I identified it with a red marker, and it has a very distinct conical pattern to it, a conical nature to it. And its stains are very small. And I actually, because of the nature of how this item was discovered, it was discovered kind of crumpled up, I wanted to make sure microscopically that those stains were in fact consistent with spatter before I identified them as spatter because of the nature of how they were found. I have a portable microscope that I actually take with me. And the reason that I can do that is because spatter reacts with fabrics completely different than a transfer stain would. And the reason is because the amount of force that's associated with the spatter pattern when it's distributed. So basically what happens is the force of the spatter pattern actually projects the blood into the fibers. So you have typically a very nice uniform shape of the spatter. The blood volume is fairly consistent. The stains are all relatively the same size. However, transfer does not have as much force behind it. So basically, transfer cannot force the blood into the fabrics the way that an impact event can. So what happens then is your transfer actually lays right on top of your fabrics. And it's very disjointed, and it becomes broken. The blood volume is irregular, the size of the stain is irregular, and it doesn't penetrate even down into the lower weaves of the knit. But you can't see that with the naked eye because the stains are so small. So we have to use a microscope in situations for that.
Shows the next photograph, 15. Just kind of close up of that area.
Yes. So here is, this scale is a larger L scale, and it actually shows you the perimeters of this particular spatter pattern. And you can see the directionally of the spatter pattern is radiating, the way it's radiating in towards the interior of the blanket. And I've documented, I believe, 3 stains within this pattern, and all 3 were consistent with spatter.
Okay, thank you. Next photograph, please.
545.
All right. Now this is an overall picture showing States 545. What is this item?
This item is a fitted sheet, and this item was bundled up with a bunch of other items that were recovered from the master bedroom bed.
Okay. And you, at the sheriff's office, took an opportunity to open it up and look at it, is that correct?
I did.
Your photograph shows a particular area of note. Can you describe what you are noting in that area?
This fitted sheet had two areas of an irregular stain that I viewed at first. The first stain was very faint in appearance. It was almost pink. But I thought, I'm going to go ahead and test it because it looks like it might be mixed in with something else. So I went ahead and I tested. I got a very faint indication for blood using a chemical known as phenolphthalein. And that is a presumptive test to identify blood. And I got a very faint positive result. So I documented it and took note of it. And then there was another stain that was darker, further a little bit away from this particular stain that I identified as area number 2.
All right, can you show us the next photograph, Mr. Schroeder?
This is 547.
All right, can you turn on the side? There. 547 and...
What about 546?
All right. Can you describe for us what's shown in these two photographs?
What was really interesting about this stain is it did not have a lot of blood associated with it. And upon first visual inspection, I thought that maybe it might be mucal membrane or something of a such. But I went ahead and tested it to see if there was a possibility of blood, and it did come back as a positive for blood. So then what I did was I went ahead and, because with the naked eye, I really can't determine exactly what type of stain this is, I also opted to photograph it microscopically as well. And the interesting thing about it is there's this thing here that's like, it's like a bridging kind of between these two stains. And in my experience, the stain was not tested, but in my experience, it's consistent in appearance with something such as a tissue or skin, just by its appearance and my experience.
This is that same sheet shown in 544. Can you describe what you're looking at here?
This is the first stain that I tested that was very, very faint. And you could just barely see it. It's located right here, and it kind of extends down a little bit this way. It's got a heavier deposition up here in this particular area.
Okay.
121.
All right. Moving to a different area of the residence. Let's kind of... perfect. This is State's Exhibit 58 that I'm referring to. Can you reference on the diagram where this photograph was taken?
This photograph was taken, this is the lower portion of the stairs. The dining room was on the upper level, and there was a stairwell that provided access to the lower level. So this would be this access from the dining room. There's a landing here that where the steps actually turn, and then they go down into the room identified as room K. That is the portion of the steps that we're looking at right here. So this would be the landing, and this would be the floor, and this would be the beginning of the room A, or excuse me, K.
Okay. Next photograph, please.
122.
Okay, so were you able to analyze some of the photographs that were collected by the Sheriff's Office of this stairwell area?
Yes.
Okay, and then in those areas, did you find things of particular note?
Yes, there was a stain that was identified as stain A that was located on the lip of the,
And this is 232.
on the lip of the edge of the landing. I call it the edge, the lip of it.
Okay.
But what was significant, it's a transfer stain. But what's significant about it, it was the transfer stain had sufficient volume such that some of the blood actually kind of ran over the side of the lip and then pooled down here at the bottom of the stain.
Okay. Transfer stain being consistent with blood.
An item was contaminated with blood and touched that part of the step and left that blood transfer stain there.
Next photograph, please.
231.
Same area of the house. This is 231. It shows a photo marker with the label Stairs C. What can you tell us about this?
I believe that did not test positive for phenol, so I
Okay.
did not use that in my analysis.
Okay.
232.
All right, we're moving into a different area of the residence. Can you say the number again, Mr. Sturgeon?
382.
Stage 382. Can you identify where on the diagram 58 this photograph is taken?
This door, this was kind of a unique area within the residence. This door that we see in this picture is actually this door that opens out to the west. It provides access to room K, but it actually opens into what I identified as the northeast small hallway of the garage.
Okay.
So what you're seeing here is the door in the open position against the north wall of that northeast hallway.
All right, and we see in this photograph that there are a number of photo markers that were placed there by the sheriff's office, correct?
Correct.
Got an opportunity to look at some of the close-ups of those areas?
I did.
And I would assume some of them were photographs were taken pre-processing and then they were later processed to develop further. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. I'd like to show you State's Exhibit
383 and 384.
Okay. Well, let's. Okay. These are the photo markers that were identified on the last photograph. What can you tell us about the nature of these marks?
This is considered to be a transfer stain, and the chemical here has been applied and it has done what we call chemical enhancement, and that just basically allows some of the blood that may not have been as visible to become enhanced to make it more visible. And what that allows us to do is if there's a pattern that we think might be a transfer pattern that might be identifiable, we'll use that chemical in order to make that possible. So that's a chemical was applied here, and that particular transfer stain is consistent in appearance to me with the handprint.
Okay. Having reviewed the FDLE analyst reports as it relates to the stains collected from this is State's Exhibit
384 still.
All right, 384. The swab was labeled JJ. Was the FDLE analyst able to identify the source of the stain as it relates to the DNA evidence?
Yes, it came back to Margaret Brown.
385.
Right. 385 represents a stain that's labeled HH by the photo marker. What can you tell us about the nature of this stain?
I identified this as a small or minor spatter event, and that's because the distribution and the size, shape, and pattern of the stain is completely different than the stain that we just saw. That previous stain was a transfer stain. These stains are more consistent in appearance with a minor spatter event. And the interesting thing about these stains is they have a very small conical appearance, this way to this way, and then you have directionality downward, which indicates to me that the force was being delivered in a downward motion because the strips, or excuse me, the spatter stains are traveling in a downward directionality.
Okay.
462.
Oh, go back on, I'm sorry. I reviewed the DNA analyst reports from FDLE as it relates to the stains that you observed here. Were they able to come to a finding as to the DNA evidence related with that stain?
My understanding is it came back to be Margaret Brown.
Okay.
462.
All right. Looking at States 462, you kind of a minute ago described this door that opens out. I'm referring to States 58, the door that leads from West Garage to Room K. Is that what's represented here?
Yes,
Okay. And this is a photograph taken post-processing, is that correct?
that's correct.
Were you able to analyze this photograph to determine whether or not there was bloodstain evidence on it?
Yes.
All right. What can you tell us about that?
These three stains were identified prior to processing. And after processing of the door, only these two stains enhanced, which is indicative of the presence of blood. So those were the only two that I analyzed, and they would be considered transfer stains. And their relationship to each other is significant because it's right near the door handle and the door latch. Then a blood stain actually enhanced that wasn't visible, completely visible prior to enhancement. And that's not uncommon when we do chemical enhancement because the purpose is, you're not going to be able to see all the blood. Also, based on the conditions of the scene and areas of alteration, it's also not uncommon in a situation like that as well. So over here, this stain right there on the door frame actually became very visible after enhancement. And because of the fact that I knew that the blood chemical was reacting appropriately, and what I mean by that is, if it's not blood, it didn't enhance it. And that is confirmed within this picture. So this, which was originally identified as a possible blood stain, which tested negative, upon chemical enhancement did not enhance. However, this did, so I felt that it was possible for me to opine that that is a transfer swipe pattern, which is consistent in linear shape with evenly spaced voids with fingers.
Uh, 371.
All right, so we're still in this west garage area. We kind of already talked about the boxes that are located here in 371. You've also already mentioned the refrigerator, and this is shown by photo marker Z. Of which state's photograph is that?
That is 373.
373. Thank you. We were able to view this and determine whether or not that was a blood stain.
Yes, I saw these photographs were taken on the scene, and I viewed these photographs.
Okay. And what can you tell us about the nature of this blood stain at photo marker Z?
At photo marker Z, they are two stains that are part of a possible pattern. There's actually 4 stains that were identified on this particular item. And the dynamics of that, because of their relationship to each other being a little bit further apart, and 1 and 2 being on the side, and 1 being on the actual shelving area of it, I could not exclude passive drip stains, and I also could not exclude cast off. So both of those can be included in the analysis.
Having reviewed the FDA analyst reports related to the DNA analysis done on this swipe or this stain from Z, what can you tell the jury about that?
It came back to be Margaret Brown.
376.
All right. What's shown here, the state's 376. What can you tell us about the stains that were located here?
These stains. Okay. These stains are on the actual floor of the garage. There was a cooler that was in front of the refrigerator, and these would be considered passive drip stains. And there's also passive drip stains down the side of the cooler.
374 and 375.
Right. And that's what's shown there at the photo marker FF. Is that correct?
Yes.
And what type of stains are those again?
Those are passive. Those are passive drip stains.
Okay.
Uh, 388.
All right, so we've already talked about the door that's kind of shown here in 388. That's this doorway that's located right here. I want to point your attention specifically to the wall opposite the wall we just talked about. So that would be this short area right here on States 58. Is that what's represented here?
Yes,
All right, and did you have an opportunity to view the photographs related to that wall?
I did.
And what can you tell us?
That wall was almost a mirror opposite of the north side of the wall. They were in very close proximity to each other. And the interesting thing about this wall was there were stains that were high up on the wall here, as you can see by the scale indication. And upon enhancement, they became consistent in appearance with a handprint. And you can see, got a handprint over here. And you can see the enhancement that was developed here with the actual chemical that they used.
Okay. And these gave positive indication for the presence of blood.
Correct.
All right.
391.
This is that same wall. We're now looking at a lower portion of it. What can you tell the jury about the stains that were observed there?
These stains are visibly different in appearance than the transfer stains that we saw above them. But the interesting thing is that they are in close proximity it's a very small access way. So these are drip stains, passive drip stains that are coming down the wall. They have, and the elongation of them and the tails indicate that the source of this blood was relatively close to the wall. So in taking in, as I discussed earlier, the history of the scene and the dynamics of this, I felt as though those passive drip stains were deposited by somebody who had a freely bleeding injury, and I felt that their correspondence and location to the handprints were significant.
Okay.
Report 58.
All right, now looking at states 458, could you orientate the jury as to where this photograph would have been taken on diagram 58?
This is actually inside the east garage. There was a door that provided access from the east garage into the northeast hallway of the west garage. So that door is actually right here. The doorway is right here, and it exits out, and you can either then turn and make a right in room K, or you can go into the west garage. This, what you're looking at there on the screen, is actually immediately next to that door. This door did not have a handle in it. So this would be the actual door portion, and this would be an area where a doorknob could be inserted. And located right here, immediately next to that, is a series of transfer swipe stains.
Okay, so I guess if you're going to open the door, you would have to either put your hand on the wall, a pole, or something to that nature?
I can't exclude that,
Okay.
yes.
States 29.
All right. We're looking at states 29. You're familiar with the photograph that's shown here?
Yes,
And the location of where this photograph was taken.
yes,
I'll just point it out for you over here. We're talking now about the east garage, correct?
correct.
And we're talking about this north wall area or north east corner of this wall, correct?
Yes.
All right. What can you tell us about the blood stains that you observed here in this photograph?
There was a very large area of pooled blood, which is encompasses most of the bottom portion of this particular photograph. And surrounding this area of pooled blood, there were 2 other areas of pooled blood. There were also multiple transfer stains, but there's also spatter patterns. And these patterns look completely different than the spatter patterns that I had seen up to this point related to this particular incident. They're so different. They're very, very elongated. They're larger in size, and they are on the floor, basically, and they radiate out away from the pooled blood. The interesting thing is, with the large pool of blood, the stains actually radiate out towards the west, whereas in the smaller pool of blood, the stains radiate out towards the east. That's 2 different spatter events.
Can you identify those on this photograph?
In this photograph, you can only see the large pool of blood, but you can see the large stains down here.
No,
Oh.
go back to the go back to the
You can see these large stains out here that are radiating out, and a lot of it is obscured by the actual blood pooling. Because the blood is going to follow the natural laws of physics, it's going to follow the topography of the floor. So this pattern is actually starting to become obscured by the blood flowing on top of that spatter pattern. But it actually does radiate further out here, and there are more distinct blood spatter pattern or spatter stains.
Okay. What does that tell you?
That tells me that 1 of 2 things occurred. There was a source of blood that was lying on the ground that was impacted with less force than the other spatter patterns that I have seen before because of their size, shape, and distribution. Or something was dropped into that pool of blood.
Okay. All right. And this is states.
457.
And what can you tell us about some of the stains that you see here in 457?
These stains were identified by photo marker 4. So I'll start first with the smaller pool of blood, which is located right here at the bottom corner of marker 4. This is a smaller pool of blood, and these are the spatters that I indicate radiate out towards the east. Now these are very elongated, and there was enough force that it actually caused them to go almost up underneath the vehicle. And they radiate out along here, and they're very elongated and they're larger in size. So that also tells me the same phenomenon occurred with this particular pool blood as did with the larger pool blood. So either something was down there on the ground and was impacted, or something was dropped in that pool of blood. Then we're able to sequence events with this particular area of pool blood. And what I mean by that is, once this event occurred where the spatter was distributed on the floor, there are multiple transfer patterns that actually interrupt some of those spatter patterns. So that tells me that this event here occurred first, and this event here occurred after, altering that stain. Then, around these stains, you have multiple transfer patterns, some of which were visually consistent with a possible shoe wear. And there was actually patterns that followed each other that were consistent in appearance with this, that traveled towards the east side of the garage. And then also there were areas of what had consistent linear lines that were consistent with fabric. So that led me to opine that there was actually something that was bloody that was fabric that also laid on this floor near these patterns.
454.
All right. Looking at stage 454 again, now we're still in that same area. Now the pin markers are being on the floor there. But I would really like to focus your attention to that northeast wall located right there. Were you able to observe blood stains along that wall?
I was.
Okay. And there's some are larger than others. Would you agree?
Yes.
Let's start with some of the larger ones, and we can talk about the what you observed.
Okay.
All right. Let's talk about the ones that are located right in the middle. All right. What can you tell us about those?
Those are transfer swipe patterns, and what's significant about them is A, they're low to the floor, so their location is important because they're low to the ground. Also, what's significant about them is there are flow patterns. And as we discussed, flow patterns are indicative of stains that have a larger volume, such that these particular areas of blood are able to follow the natural gravitational pull and be flow down. Some even flow down all the way to the baseboard. Then you also have some of these flow patterns here are interrupted. And some of these stains weren't as visible until enhancement had occurred. And if I remember correctly, I believe one of these stains had foreign substance in it.
Okay. Let's zoom out, Mr. Sturgia. I'd like to talk about this corner area of the wall right here. This area, I think it was referred to as
486.
Can you see the number again?
486.
486, yeah. What can you tell us about the area on this wall?
This area of the wall, there was nothing really visible prior to enhancement. However, when they applied the chemical to this wall, very distinct stains became visible. The first one of note is going to be this swipe pattern that's down here fairly low to the ground, visually consistent in appearance with the other patterns that I had spoken about earlier. But then, this enhanced. And these very small stains in this area are consistent with spatter. What's also interesting is higher up on the wall, there's smaller stains that become distinctly linear, which is different. That's cast off. So I identified this area as a possible spatter event and or events, and there was cast off up above here.
Looking at stage 450, I want to pay particular attention to the item that was located. We'll start with the pillow and the pillowcase.
448.
448. We'll start with the pillow and the pillowcase first. And do you have an opportunity to analyze and look at the pillowcase at the sheriff's office?
I did.
527.
All right, and these are photographs that you took?
They are.
Can you, A lot of stuff going on in these pillowcases. Can you just give us an understanding of what type of stain these are?
That is what I would call a large saturation stain that almost completely encompasses the entire pillow on this particular side. And there are corresponding large saturation stains which are on the pillow, and that's consistent with the pillowcase being on the pillow. However, there is a distinct stain or a distinct pattern on this pillow that's completely different than the spatter stain, and it is another impact spatter pattern.
530.
You see it on this photo?
No, it's actually on the pillowcase.
It shows the pillowcase.
529.
So this would be the portion of the pillowcase that you insert the pillow into. This is the very large saturation pattern. And then here, highlighted in the green arrows, is a impact spatter pattern.
28.
And this is actually kind of hard to see because the saturation is actually starting to wick and begin to obscure the pattern. But you can still see some of the radiating small stains that would be at the top of the pattern, which would place the area of origin where the source of blood was when it was impacted further onto the pillow, which is consistent with where the saturation pattern is.
All right. While we're doing the FDLE analyst reports related to the pillow and the pillowcase, were they able to provide an identification as to the DNA located on those items?
Yes.
And what were they able to tell us?
The DNA belonged to Nicholas Leonard.
And that was an item that was located in, we're still talking about items located in the East Garage, correct?
Yes, it was bundled up in a rug in the corner.
561.
All right, what is shown here in States 561?
This is a brown comforter blanket that was also found bundled up with that pillow we just discussed, and that was located in the rug in the corner.
Okay. And did you analyze it to see whether or not there was blood stains on it?
I did. There were saturation stains and transfer stains on this particular item, and one of the transfer stains was consistent in appearance with the shoe wear.
Okay.
562.
Is that what we're talking about here?
Yes,
States
this
562?
is the pattern that was consistent in appearance with shoe wear.
All right, and would that be described as a transfer stain?
Yes.
Okay.
563.
And this is that same rug, just a different portion. You identified there was a saturation stain on it as well?
And multiple transfer stains and everything around the saturation.
All right, next photograph, please.
560.
Then that's that same item.
Yes, these are just additional photographs. I take photographs from different angles.
Okay.
568.
All right. What is represented here in States 568?
This is a white blanket that was also recovered among that brown comforter and the pillow inside of that rug. And this demonstrated some very interesting patterns in and of itself. The first being this large transfer pattern that's located on one side of this item.
567.
So I documented that with a large scale just to show the size of it. And it's a large volume transfer pattern. And the interesting thing is that you can tell this transfer pattern was actually distributed when this blanket was partially folded, because you have these voids, which is where the fabric actually creased. So the fabric would have actually creased, and then the blood was deposited while it was in the creased position, which is why you have these undersides, these folds that have the blood.
Okay.
66.
Is this that same sheet we're talking about?
Yes, this is the same sheet that I was just speaking with that had the large transfer stain. I identified this particular pattern. This is actually cast off, and it is identified by the purple ringlets. And the purple ringlets identify different stains within the pattern. It has those very elongated appearance, and the distribution of it is consistent with the spatter pattern radiating in towards the center of the item.
Okay.
569.
This is also on the same item, and this is also a cast-off pattern, but it's linear. So it was distributed by a different swinging motion or way that a particular item was turned because it's linear in nature.
Okay.
227.
All right, and we're talking here, this is a new photograph of a new area in the house. It's located, can you say the state's number again?
227.
227, with a photo marker labeled stairwell B. Could you identify on the the diagram 58 where this was taken from?
That is stairwell B. That is the door that opens up into room K at the bottom of the stairs. So it is this door down here,
Okay.
right here.
All right, and upon visual observation of the photograph, are you able to determine whether or not there's a blood stain in this photograph?
Yes, transfer stain by the handle.
Okay. Next photograph.
229.
All right. Is this a photograph of the same door?
Yes, it is.
All right. Is it kind of a different location?
Yes.
Is there something on the photograph that allows you to kind of orientate the jury to maybe? Well, I guess what I'm asking is, what's this?
That is an eyelet for a hook and eyelet latch.
Okay.
And that's at the top of the door. And so the eyelet is on the door itself. So when it's in the closed position, the actual hook is adhered to the door frame. So when you want to secure this door in this fashion, you take the hook and you put it inside the eyelet. And this is a transfer pattern that is on the door near the eyelet.
Okay.
480.
All right. Okay. It's really kind of hard to see on out for that. I mean, I think we're looking. Can you recognize what you're looking at in this photograph? It would be easier. You could walk over to the elbow and see the photograph itself.
If I may do that.
Sure.
That's Blue Star or Luminol, and I believe that's bedroom A. Is that the three-tier shelving unit? That's what it appears to be.
All right. Well, let's just talk a second, step back and talk. We've had some conversation about luminol. I'm going to show you some pictures about that. You've talked about the chemical enhancement, and these photographs, some of them show blue, and in the faintness in some of the photographs, you can see blue. What does that mean?
That is actually what we call luminescence, and that is a reaction with heme in the blood. It's reaction with an oxidase an oxygen peroxidase reaction. And basically what happens is a little bit of heat is generated, and that causes it to glow.
Okay. So the glows, what does that indicate to you?
That it's indicative of a possible blood stain, and it's Luminol's claim to fame, or Blue Star, which is a luminol derivative. Its claim to fame is it's very good. It's extremely sensitive, so it's really good at finding blood that is not visible to the naked eye and/or has been altered or cleaned up.
481.
That's kind of what we're seeing here in States 481. The areas that show the blueness that would be consistent with possible presence of blood.
Correct.
That wouldn't be visible to the naked eye.
Correct.
And you talk about the sensitivity because if someone were to clean up or try to dilute an area where there was once blood, we can still show that there was blood there later, correct?
Correct.
And that's kind of what these photographs are showing, correct?
Correct.
And what is this State's exhibit?
About 481.
Are you familiar with this photograph?
May I look at it?
Sure.
Yes.
Okay. Let's put those back on and limitations of technology. What does this indicate to you? What area of the house is this?
This is in the master bedroom. Near the entryway, there was like a half circular kind of arcing wall that led down to the closet, and this is the baseboard area of it, and the arc actually starts to turn down here, and this is your tile over in this area.
Okay. So although there wasn't blood, I mean, this is probably a better photograph of that.
Correct.
The fact that there wasn't blood visually apparent, there was still indication that there was blood or bodily fluids there, correct?
Yes, it is an indication of that, yes.
Okay. All right.
120.
Okay, boom. We're back in the stairwell, page 120. Thank you for finding that one. You kind of gave some testimony about the eyelet that matched the door. This is the hook that matches, is that correct?
Yes.
As you viewed this photograph, were you able to determine whether or not there was blood stains associated in this area?
Yes, those are transfer stains right next to the hook.
All right.
Wait, there were a couple you had. This is 467, 468.
Okay, I guess this is just a really good visual observation of the luminescence that you were talking about.
Yes.
Okay.
Even 465 and 466.
Again, areas of where there was luminescence, correct?
Yes.
Even though it's not visually apparent, there appears to be.
Yes, because I believe the first photo was a pre-treatment and the second's post-treatment.
Okay. All right. So, kind of taken a long walk around the house and looked at a number of the areas in which you've analyzed and photographed, the areas in which the Sheriff's Office investigators analyzed and photographed, and upon reviewing the medical examiner's photographs and the medical examiner's reports and the DNA reports, which we've referenced a number of times, I'd like to kind of talk about some possible conclusions that your analysis yielded, okay?
Okay.
So I'd like to start where we started our discussion. I'm going to move this up front. I'd like to reference State's Exhibit 59. Let's start with Room A, the southeast bedroom, okay? Talked about a number of items that were located in this room. We talked about a fan, a 3-tier bookcase, and some of the stains that were located in the closet and on the floor. All right. What can you tell us about the blood stains as it relates to the other evidence in this case?
In my opinion, the blood shedding event that consisted of the blunt trauma sustained by Nicholas Leonard occurred in Room A.
All right.
And that is based on the multiple DNA identifications in the room. The identification of the cast-off in the closet, which is consistent with an item that contains blood being swung, as well as the cast-off on the curtains that were documented in the original crime scene photographs as hanging in that particular room, as well as the saturation stain that also came back to being Nicholas Leonard. So those are the stationary items that I am able to opine on that particular conclusion. I also feel comfortable in stating that the chair, the fan, the 3-tier cabinet, or excuse me, shelving unit were also in the room when during the blood shedding event. I also believe that the items that were found in the West Garage.
Let's talk about that for a second. There were a number of items that were found in the West Garage in the area close to, I guess, the southwestern corner of the garage. Those items, even though they came back positive for Nicholas Leonard's blood, why do you think that the bloodletting event did not occur in that room?
For the reason that I stated occurred in Room A, is there are stationary items in Room A that were not removed from Room A that contain stains that were consistent in appearance with the blunt injuries that Nicholas received. However, in the West Garage, there was not. The blood that was identified as belonging to Nicholas Leonard was on movable items that had obviously that had been moved to that particular area because there were no what we call rusticating or same stains within the areas that the items were found. So for example, those storage containers were found sitting in the middle of the room. There wasn't spatter on the floor around it.
Okay.
There's no spatter documented on the vehicle that it was near. Same goes for the wicker basket.
Right.
The other thing was the items that were located, there were transfer stains on some of them as well, which is indicative of movement of these particular items, something contaminated touching these items.
So the items that were found in the West Garage, Do you believe, based on the location of the spatter, the type of the spatter, the type of stains, those were originally in the room at the time of the bloodletting event as it relates to Nicholas Leonard?
Yes, as was, I believe, the mattress topper.
All right, let's talk about the mattress topper. You analyzed the stains that were located on that topper.
Yes.
On the pillow top. The fact that there was a large saturation stain in the middle, you came to the opinion that Mr. Leonard did not move during from that spot during the attack. Is that correct?
There was minimal movement. He did not, once, during that particular bloodletting event, no. I believe that he was either on the mattress or really close to it.
Okay. And you talked about some of the cast-off stains that were located on that pillow top mattress. They were, you indicated 5 distinct cast-off stains on top of that mattress top, correct?
Yes.
In fact, there was actually cast-off that went all the way into the closet. Is that correct?
Yes, and onto the curtains.
You gave some examples of things that could cause cast-off, and you used the pointer, but I'd like to show you what's been introduced as State's Exhibit 235. Okay? I'm talking about an item as just for the purposes of cast-off. Now, just so we're clear, this item was tested for DNA and there was no DNA on it. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. But as far as an item that would produce cast-off, talking about a hammer that looks like this, is this an item that would produce cast-off?
If it was involved in multiple blows, yes.
Okay. And you kind of gave a description as to the type of cast-off, and I believe you said it was used in its proper form. Correct. If something were to be used in a motion like that, would it in fact cause the cast-off that you observed on the pillow top?
If it's used in its traditional fashion,
Okay.
Yes, the surface would be more linear.
Okay. As opposed to used in not the traditional fashion. If we were going to say something to like on its side, is that correct?
Yes.
All right. But this is an item that would cause or is consistent with the cast-off that was generated as it relates to the pillow top.
I can't exclude it.
Okay. There was blood that was found in the master bedroom, and I'll talk about the stains that were located in and around room G, the ones that were identified as to Megan Brown. You indicated those to be a particular type of stain. What did you indicate they were?
I stated that they were consistent with an impact event that was described as occurring to Megan Brown.
Okay. Now, an impact, you've seen the medical examiner's reports, and you've been advised that the manner of death and cause of death was a gunshot wound, correct?
Yes.
All right. And you're also familiar with the actual nature of the injury.
Yes.
As far as the fact that there's an entrance wound and there's not an exit wound.
Correct.
All right. Based on your experience, when you had an entrance wound with no exit wound, is there force required to push the bullet into the person, correct?
Yes.
Would that cause, what would that do to the blood in a person's body?
When a gunshot wound is inflicted upon a bodily part, especially the head, there's a lot of pressure that is built up in that area, and this all occurs simultaneously. If you have an exit wound, the blood will want to continue to follow the direction of the projectile, of the bullet, follow the direction of the force. So it will want to exit, and we call that forward spatter. When you do not have an exit wound, the blood still has to go somewhere because of the pressure that is built up to the nature of the injury. So the blood is going to react like any other liquid. It is going to want to escape the only place it can, and that is going to be out of the injury back towards where the force was coming from, and that's called back spatter. And it's a phenomenon, and they both are considered spatter patterns. It's just a determination of the medical examiner as to whether there's an entry or an exit wound.
Well, in this case, upon review of the medical examiner's report, the fact that there's not an exit, you would expect to see that type of spatter, it would be a back spatter as you described it, from the injuries that Megan Brown sustained.
Yes.
Okay. And the impact spatter that you observed in the room that was identified to her, is that consistent with back spatter from an injury that she sustained?
I believe so, yes.
All right. If you were to go to the the closet located in room H. We spent some time talking about the fact that there's a threshold area and there's a particular stain that was located right at the threshold from the room into the closet. You know the stain I'm talking about?
Yes, there's a transfer stain.
Right, let's talk about that. The DNA analysis identified that as being associated with Nicholas Leonard, correct?
That is correct.
All right, and you identified it as a transfer stain based on your analysis of the photographs of the rooms and the injuries sustained. Can you give us an opinion as to how that stain got there?
An individual contaminated with Mr. Leonard's blood transferred that stain, and it was ultimately either diluted before it was transferred and or diluted afterwards.
Okay, but it required the word you used was contamination, but that would require there be blood on the actual person, correct?
Correct. Transfer requires that a bloody source comes into contact with another source, transferring the blood.
Okay. And since we're speaking about room H, there was also a saturation stain located there, correct?
Inside the closet.
Right, and that was a saturation stain associated with Greg Brown, correct?
Yes, that was the result I led.
Right. I'd now like to refer to State's Exhibit 58. This is the diagram of the downstairs portion of the house. Let's start in the west garage. We've talked about the items that you've identified as being originally in the southeast bedroom, but there were some other items that we talked about. We talked about a box, we talked about a refrigerator, and we talked about some of the stains along the floor and the cooler. What can you tell us about your analysis of that area of the west garage?
The stains on the refrigerator were either passive drip or cast off. I wasn't able to make a differentiation on that. But the stains that were in close proximity to the refrigerator, as well as on the cooler in front of the refrigerator and the floor in front of the refrigerator, were passive drip stains. The stains on the refrigerator came back to Margaret Brown.
And if we move from that area straight to this northern wall in the west garage, we talked about a number of stains located along that wall. And you identified those stains as what type of stain?
There were multiple transfer stains on that north wall, and then also a minor spatter event on that north wall.
All right. And that spatter event would indicate what to you based on your analysis?
The testing came back to be Margaret Brown, so I associated those patterns and stains with injury to Margaret Brown.
All right. And you reviewed the medical examiner's report as it relates to that, and are you aware of the number of injuries that she sustained?
Yes.
All right. And you were aware of the location in which those injuries were originated from, correct?
Yes.
All right. The injuries that she sustained, which were her head?
Yes.
And would those be injuries consistent with the blood that you see there along the west garage wall?
The spatter event, small spatter event can be. The others are transfer, where something contaminated with her blood, one at least being one hand, came into contact with that wall in close proximity to that spatter event.
All right. And if we were to go along that same wall in the west garage, we talked about some stains that were observed by you in the area right here between the west garage and room K. What can you tell us about those stains as it relates to the events that occurred there?
That was a transfer stain that was on that interior side next to the door without the handle.
You also mentioned that along that wall there were some stains along the ground. I'm sorry, towards the ground on the wall. What can you tell us about those?
On the north wall, inside the east garage, there were swipes and transfer stains.
Okay. All right. And then if we were going to the east garage room area, we saw evidence along this north wall there. What can you tell us about what had to have occurred there to cause those stains?
The large area of pooled blood, an individual bleeding actively was allowed to lay there for an extended period of time, such that the blood was allowed to form large pooling, to follow the topography of the ground, and to absorb into the baseboard.
Okay. And there was the particular area of that corner, you indicated that you observed that there was some spatter there, correct?
After chemical enhancement, stains consistent with spatter became visible.
And is that associated with a bloodletting event?
That is, a spatter is associated with a bloodletting event, yes.
All right. And then we talked about a number of these doorways in this area in room K, going from the west garage, the east garage, into this stairwell area. there were a number of stains associated with the doors, correct?
Yes,
And many of those stains were transfer stains.
yes, most of them.
All right. There were indicative of blood being collected on someone's hand or some item and actually touching those door areas. Is that correct?
Yes, an item or an individual's somewhere on their body was contaminated with blood and transferred stains on those doors.
Anyone know where you're on?
You may.
No further questions, Your Honor.
All right, can I have the lawyers at the bench really quickly? All right, for the record, 513 is entered into evidence. We found it is the blanket. We talked about it. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to let you go to lunch now. I would normally let you have an hour, but I'm going to shorten it just a little bit. I'm going to have you back at 2 o'clock. It's 12:50 now. 12:50, 1:50. That's more. I mean less. Wow. I'm going to have you back at 1:45 down in the jury pool room, all right? No talking about it, tweeting, texting, or blogging, and we'll see you at 1:45.